Kriga Bundalo. Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and welcome to the library. Coming to you from here today because, well, you saw the thumbnail back there. That's what brought you here. Today we are covering my favorite Robert E. Howard story of all times, The Queen of the Black Coast. That's right, Battle Royale number 20, double X, as we get into this one, and we're going to be comparing the Marvel adaptation to the Ablaze adaptation. Now, I'll tell you guys, I really put this one off for quite some time. This is the last one of the original Battle Royales that I had scheduled to actually do because, well, you should never meet your heroes. And one of my real fears in this was that I was going to dive into the Queen of the Black Coast again after reading it God knows how many times, but then reading it in detail and saying, maybe it wasn't good as I remembered it. Well, I'm pleased to say I was entirely stupid with that fear because I still love it. It's still my favorite Robert E. Howard story. And I reread the Marvel and the Ablaze adaptations in the last week. So we're going to throw in the spoiler alert now that we always put in. If you don't want to know what happened in the Marvel adaptation of this one, you probably don't want to watch this video. But quite frankly, how are you a Conan fan when you don't know what happened in the Marvel adaptation of the Queen of the Black Coast? Really? Come on. If you don't want to know what happened in the Ablaze adaptation, now granted, some people may not have read that, you probably don't want to watch the video. As you guys know, what we do in this is we're going to turn the camera around, we're going to look down at the desk, and we're going to go through both of these comic adaptations pretty much page by page, but we are going to have to skip through some of those Ablaze ones, well, because, well, they're a little spicy. So we'll get through it together. But as I say, if you don't want to know, don't. Now, I will say this. We're chapterizing all of these videos, as you guys know. There's a bunch of different segments we have to talk through here. So without any further ado, let's get into it. I'm just a soul whose intentions are good. Da-da-dum-dum-dum. Oh, Lord, please don't let me be misunderstood. The world needs more animals. That was Animal Lint, in fact, because, well, I'm sharing the recording space right now with our latest rescue animal, Crystal. As you can see, she gave me a little reward the other day. She's still working on integrating with Senor Bean and Princess Pants Jones. So as we get there, well, she's going to be in the safe space with me. Let's just put it that way. So structure-wise, what are we going to do today? We're going to talk about a variety of different chapters here. As you guys know in our Battle Royales, the whole goal here is to discuss which one of these adaptations is closer to the original Robert E. Howard adaptation. Not which one's my favorite, which one objectively follows the Robert E. Howard tick boxes to get through the story. And then we come back with a conclusion and say this is it. In this particular Battle Royale, we're only doing part one today because there's actually a tertiary, not second, version of the Queen of the Black Coast that was done by Dark Horse that's going to go on and face the winner of this video. So, content-wise, here's what we're going to do. I want to talk about pronunciation right now. I have talked about the Queen of the Black Coast on this channel numerous times, and I have mentioned the name of the female pirate in the Queen of the Black Coast on this channel numerous times. I have mentioned this name a bajillion times in my lifetime. We're talking 50 years of stupidity in my head where I have always said this name as Belit. Now I know that's entirely wrong, but that's the one I always fall to. I have been corrected on this channel. I've been told, no, it's Belit. I have been told it's Belit, but we're going to go with a new convention on this video, and I'm going to put an image up over here. That is the original footnote from the editors of Marvel Comics way back in Conan number 58 to let you and I, the readers, know how Marvel wants us to pronounce this name. So going forward, I will make every effort possible to, instead of saying Belit, say Belit, which is what Marvel apparently wants me to say. So that's what we're going to go with. Administration-wise, we're going to first talk about what the story of the Queen of the Black Coast is. What happened in there? What are the major events? Many of you have already read this story, so I'm going to go through that fairly cursory because this is a fairly popular Robert E. Howard piece. Then we're getting into the Marvel comic adaptation. The Marvel comic adaptation, just for clarity, we are going to consider here is only issue number 58. I will reference issue 59 a little bit, and then we're going to jump into issue number 100. The reason for that is really, the Queen of the Black Coast is covered entirely in issue 58 and issue 100. There's a lot of issues in between, but that's not part of the prose piece, so we're going to set those aside. Then we're going to get into the Ablaze version of this one. Now, the Ablaze version, it's a little spicy. As you guys know, Ablaze does push the envelope a little bit as to what they want in their books. They want it to be the raw, uncensored Robert E. Howard story, and yeah, they do. But we're fairly PG on this channel, so we're going to skip a couple pages there. We're just going to go through the actual hardcover edition of that one instead of the individual books to get through that because, well, I don't feel like going downstairs and digging out all the books. Then we're going to come back at the end of this and do our objective wrap-up, which one's closer to the Robert E. Howard version. That will go on then to face off against Dark Horse in our next video. So, there's our structure, everybody. Let's get into it. Cause I got a woman so long and tall, she sleeps in the kitchen with her feet in the hall. Yeah, hot tamales in the red hot. Yeah, got 'em for sale. Okay, let's talk about the Queen of the Black Coast. I am really excited. You can tell from the hand talking, all of this. I'm a little excited to talk about this one. Queen of the Black Coast is my favorite Robert E. Howard story. Let me tell you why right before we get into what happens in the story. I think it's the piece for me that shows the most growth for Conan as a character. Robert E. Howard wrote a lot of stories about Conan at different aspects of his life doing different things, like either a king or a buccaneer or, just hanging out being a mercenary or being a thief. Lots of things for Conan and Robert E. Howard. They clearly knew one another. But you and I as a reader don't see a lot of action within the stories where you see Conan develop. And this is why I really like Queen of the Black Coast. A, because Belit is there. See, I caught myself on the name there. But B, because you see Conan grow because of what happens to him. And I've always been mystified with what happens to him immediately thereafter. I'm sure fan fiction has written a bajillion stories about what people think happened immediately thereafter. But we'll never know. Anyway, here's what happens in the story. So the story starts off in Argos. Now, Argos is, over there. It's that pink thing over there. And it's mainly a shipping place. Now, I have always assumed this story starts off in Mysantium. But when I actually read through the story, I didn't see anywhere where it told me specifically it was Mysantium. But it's a port town. Conan is thundering along on a horse, heading towards the docks because he's being chased by the city guard. You don't know why, but he's tearing through town and people are getting out of his way. And he is in full battle regalia. Not like a suit of armor or anything, but chainmail. He's basically showing himself off to be a well-to-do mercenary at this point in time and get the F out of his way. So he's tearing off towards the pier. He rides all the way down to the end of the pier, brings the horse rearing to a stop where people were kind of wondering, is he going to jump that horse into the water? And then dives off the horse onto a ship that's already on its way out of port and has some words with the ship's master, whose name is Tito. And they agree that he's allowed to stay on board as opposed to turning around because now city guard have arrived at the dock and they're ordering the ship to turn around. Well, they row their way out of port until they actually catch a gust of wind and they're gone. The archers from port can't even reach them. And there's a long involved conversation with Tito as he gets to know Conan, and Conan gets to know a little bit about Tito. Tito being a merchant that basically heads from Argos down into basically Koth to trade with the Kothians and move goods back and forth. That's effectively what you see Tito doing. That's his function in life. He's got a ship's complement of, I believe, 24, including himself, and they're going to take Conan on because why not have a guy with a good sword arm on? He can do some good just in case they run into some pirates or something along those lines. And they head effectively down the coast past Shem, past Stygia, and then into Kush. Fairly uneventfully, but along the way, Tito takes the time to explain to Conan that there is, in fact, a pirate, or pirates, all throughout the area, and the worst one of them is Belit. She and her group of corsairs are slaughtering everybody. And as they head into Koth, because they do drive past Stygia, and as they head past Stygia, there is actually a description of a barge coming out that is covered in I guess, scantily clad women of the night who are suggestively, provocatively trying to draw them in, but they know going in there is death, so they keep going. It's an interesting thing as they describe actually heading down the coast and the different people that they do run past. In fact, even the people of Shem were they were described in some interesting ways. It's interesting. Anyways, they head on into Koth, and as they're heading in, they do run into the first village that Tito would have formerly traded with, and everybody has been slaughtered. Tito says, this, if I don't know any better, is the work of Belit. And he explains to Conan who Belit is, that she's this horrible, horrible pirate queen that runs these corsairs, and they slaughter everybody. Within almost no time whatsoever, lo and behold, who comes out from behind an island as they're sailing past but Belit's pirate corsairs. They start to run down Tito's ship. Tito, like a madman, is trying to get his men to row into shore, trying to get them into an actual, I guess it's an estuary, so that they can then flee inland and potentially survive. Well, they're run down by Belit. They are shot and pinned with arrows while Conan is shooting back with them with a bow and arrow. Conan actually at one point in time has Belit clearly lined up in his sights and is about to take her out, and then for some reason on a whim decides that he's going to take out the person standing next to her. Unfortunately, they're still a mile from shore when Belit does actually overtake them. Hooks take the side of the ship, and Conan wastes no time hanging out on Tito's ship, which I believe is called the Argus, or the Argosy, but dives onto the Tigris, which is Belit's ship, and starts slaughtering the Corsairs there. A massive battle ensues where the Corsairs really just don't have the weaponry that's necessary to pierce Conan's chainmail armor. He's taking nicks and cuts, but he's slaughtering them. And in the process of doing that, he's laying a swath of bodies all over the Tigris. Finally, the Corsairs figure out, wait, why are we doing this? Let's just step back, and then we'll all spear him at the same time. That's probably a good strategy. They're about to do this when suddenly they are told to halt by Belit herself, who actually walks up to Conan, who's somewhat leery, and starts asking questions. Where are you from? What do you do? Well, without getting into too much detail, what happens is she decides to take Conan as her king to help her raid, because she has been smitten by Conan. Conan, who's looking for anything to do, it's like, well, if I go onto that ship, which is currently listing and falling into the ocean, I'm going to die. But if I stay here with you, I'm probably going to be fine. He says, I'm somewhat leery, but yeah, I will totally sail with you. And off they go. A period of time passes. Not a descriptive period of time. Unfortunately, you don't really get a sense of how long it occurs for, which is probably where Marvel gets their play, where they say, well, you know what, we're going to have about 30 issues of this whole Conan armor raiding thing to really explain how long this goes on. But time passes. Robert E. Howard really just cursively goes through that. And the locals and people up and down the coast get to know, well, Conan's not a guy to be messed with. He's this steely-eyed lion that'll kill pretty much anything that moves. Just as dangerous as Belit and her Corsairs herself. They end up making their way down to the very bottom of Koth, where they end up running into a river. And Belit does explain, listen, you know, I chased a ship up here previously. And, you know, they went up there, and I was waiting here for days. And then the ship came down completely empty, just covered in blood. It was really odd. But I hear that there's a city up there. We should go sack it. Unfortunately, the water's really poisonous, though. We can't drink any of it. But we should be fine. And Conan's like, listen, I'll go wherever you want me to go. Let's go. And they do. They head up the coast. After the first night, they have set up a watchman and a giant python, which is just it's really actually interesting as to whether this is a python or a viper. I'm going to say it's a python. Giant python comes out of the water. It's described in such a way that it's almost the size of a tree. And it comes down, and I believe the description describes the python coming down and actually eating, or at least taking a substantial portion of the night watchman just completely out from overhead. And when Conan hears the yelp or the yell and then comes running after he's been talking to Belit about, well, basically Sumerian philosophy, because why not talk Sumerian philosophy when you're on a river going in the middle of nowhere? He comes running out and slashes into this snake, and then it jumps down and falls into the water with, unfortunately, the watchman with him. You're hearing Crystal over here playing with her tree in the background. As I said, she's assisting me today with our actual production. Doing a great job, too. Anyways, Conan slices the snake down. It falls into the water. He decides to take watch for the night, and nothing happens. When they wake in the morning, they find they actually are at the docks of this giant city they were looking for, but unfortunately, it's completely in ruins. It's not a good scenario. They head on land. They find effectively first they head on land, where they see a pyramid with a giant pillar sticking out of the top of it. And they all sort of wonder, well, what is that thing? And at the top of that, because Conan sees it move a little bit, and they find it's a giant winged ape. Really an interesting thing, horrifying in many, many ways, but a giant winged ape that just flies off. And they go, Now, at this point in time, you would probably think to yourself, wow, winged ape, ruins, poisonous water, snakes the size of trees. We probably shouldn't be here. But, Belit and Conan, they don't care. Why not? Let's just go get everybody killed. They wander on in, and they find what they think is a temple. It's the last of this giant tower with a sacrificial podium on it, where they say, well, look at all these channels to hold the blood. 10,000 days or years of rain haven't worn away the channels. Open it up. There's going to be treasure in it. And by the way, Conan, there's a snake over here. Can you come and kill the snake for me? Don't go over there and help them. Kill the snake. Well, there's a reason why she did that. She knew it was going to be trapped, and the minute they get this thing to swing to the side, the tower that's behind it falls and kills all 4 of the Corsairs that are doing it. Really shows the ruthlessness of Belit as a person. And it's funny because you don't really have a description of that throughout the rest of the story because everything has just been going la-di-da based on what Robert E. Howard is writing. Weird, right? Anyways, Belit looks into this giant pile of loot that's at the bottom, dives a hand in and pulls out a necklace. Now, how she saw this, I don't know. Pulls out a necklace that's covered in these things that look like frozen drops of gleaming blood. And Conan's looking at this going, that's a weird necklace. She's like, I like this. And Conan notices this weird gleam in her eye and how she's behaving differently in this town. He's like, huh, I don't know about this. This is getting a little odd to me. And while they're doing this, they suddenly see or hear a ruckus and look back and see the winged ape flying away from their ship. And Conan curses himself for not leaving a guard there and goes running back wondering, geez, I wonder if he's stove in the bottom of their ship. He has not stove in the bottom of the ship. What he's done is destroyed all their drinking water. He wants them to die slowly. Ooh, that's intelligent. Huh. Anyway, Conan says, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a bunch of spearmen. I'm going to go off over here. We're going to try to find some water. You guys hang out here. And Belit, sorry. Got to catch myself with that. Basically says, go. Somewhat disinterested. Which, again, it's described in such a way that you're getting a sense that she's ensorcelled or getting a sense of that she's somewhat smitten with A, the town, but B, the loot. And how does she know about this one necklace? And why the necklace? Very absent look on her face, I guess, while Conan goes wandering off. Well, he's wandering off, and he hears a noise behind him, and he tells his men, okay, you guys wander on. I'm gonna back check the trail here. I'm gonna stay here and be really quiet. You guys go, and wait for me as soon as I'm out of sight. And he waits for a while, but nothing happens. And that's unfortunately when he discovers, oh crap, I'm standing under a giant outcropping of black lotus. This is when he recognizes the smell, and it's too late, and he's unconscious. And this is where really weird, and this is where the mysticism of Robert E. Howard really jumps out, and you really have to be impressed with this. Because while Conan's unconscious, he starts to dream. The clouds in his mind clear, and he sees the formation of the city. He sees the original inhabitants, which are these winged people that are like the furthest forward version of an adapted or an evolved human being that Conan could imagine, but with wings. Fascinating. And he talks through this and he says, wow, look at these guys. He said, well, in his own mind. And this city and how it changes and how basically they're the oldest race on the planet. But something happened where, and Robert E. Howard is very intelligent in doing this, the poles shifted. And when the poles shifted, the earth shifted. There was earthquakes. Suddenly black things or black fluid came out of the ground. It poisoned their drinking water. The area around it that was just great savannas suddenly grew into overgrown forests and then swamps. The people who drank the river water died. Well, I call them people, but they're winged creatures. Died. But those who did survive over generations devolved back to the worst versions of humanity that they could be, which are these demonic ape with wings. And then they fought one another in blood feuds and then resorted to cannibalism until that's why there's only one left. But it kept the knowledge of its prior race with it in a perverted manner. It's this phenomenal description. And then time passes until a group of 50 Stygians come meandering in over time and sleep in the city where the winged ape is. The winged ape comes out while they're asleep and ensorcels them and turns them into giant hyenas that then he uses over time to kill stragglers that come in. When people or Cushites or people from Koth come upriver with their ships covered in skulls, you can see them being slaughtered by the hyenas and how this has happened over time. Then you see the Conan coming upriver on a ship, and Conan then recognizes that he's dreaming. And then he sees the whole issue of basically the tower falling. But he sees himself wandering off. He sees himself falling. And then he sees his own men waiting patiently for him. But he sees them suddenly startled and tearing off into the bush at full speed, headlong. And this is when he's like, ooh, and he forces himself awake. And he recognizes he's near the lotus, fights himself away from the lotus, goes tearing after his men to find that, yes, they did in fact get terrified by something. It was the winged ape that came down upon them. And they were driven mad at the sight of it. And they took off, dropping their spears. And unfortunately, were run right off a cliff. Kind of the same way we think we used to hunt for mammoths. Really horrifying. One of the spearmen actually survives, but he's been driven mad by the sight and actually attacks Conan. And Conan unfortunately does have to kill him. And you can see Conan, well, you can't see him because it's a prose piece, but you can envision Conan actually suffering through that because this is somebody that he's described as respecting and that he liked and that he worked with on the Tigris for all this time. This is when Conan suddenly goes, oh, where's everybody else? and tears back to the ship. When he tears back to the ship, he finds a slaughter. All of his men are gone, but he doesn't see any other bodies of what attacked them, but he can only describe it as a slaughter. And as he approaches the tigress, because he's terrified of what's happened to Belit, he finds her hanging naked from the yardarm by the very necklace that she was so ensorcelled with. You cut scene. Conan has now made a funeral pyre. He's left her on the ship. He's thrown the wretched treasure that comes from this accursed city over into the river. It's nothing to do with this. He's just covered Belit in basically her own loot that she came up the river with. And he's now waiting at the top of the pyramid because he knows this intelligent ape creature is coming for him and that it's going to attack because it wants him to suffer and die slowly. And as he waits, the hyenas appear. But there isn't 50 anymore. There's 20. And he's proud because his men, he thinks, took down some of these hyenas over time. But he's like, but why aren't there any bodies? That's kind of weird. And he pulls out his arrow and he starts pin-cushioning these hyenas as they charge. And he takes out all of them but 3. The last 3 he has to brutally kill. And just as he finishes off the last one, he's exhausted and he's wiping the sweat from his brow. He hears the noise over him. He pulls up his sword, waiting for the winged ape above him. And that's when the winged ape pulls its trump card. Basically collapses the entire tower that he's waiting on underneath him. He dives off and manages to get himself mostly free, but he finds himself pinned by a piece of, I guess it's described as pillar. But it is marble. So it could be a marble pillar. Who knows? He's pinned by it. He's trying to get it off, but it's not really moving. But his sword is exactly 1 inch out of reach, even though he's thrown his full body like that at trying to get it. And the winged ape is landed nearby. It's now charging him. He knows he's not going to get this thing off of his legs in time. And this is when the second piece of magic, the real beauty of the story, actually occurs. Remember earlier I talked about how Conan was sitting on the ship with Belit and they were discussing, well, Sumerian philosophy. They were discussing what Conan believed in after life. And Conan's like, no. If you're lucky, you're going to be wandering forever in a world of cold and mist. This is why I live the best I can now. And Belit turns to him and says, no, I know there's an afterlife. And I also know that my love for you is stronger than death. Our souls are entwined. You have pulled me into you. And when I die, if I'm lying still in death and you're still fighting for life, I will come back to fight with you and for you. And this is the moment when it happens. He's stuck. He can't move. This thing is charging him down. He can't get his sword when suddenly a vision of a naked Belit appears. Well, naked except for, I guess, her breastplate. Whatever it was that she was wearing. It was really odd. She jumps at the ape, and the ape is smitten by this bright light of this human that's now suddenly in front of him. Now think about how horrifying this would be for this demonic ape. This ape literally murdered this woman. Hung her from a yardarm by a necklace that was probably cursed. I'm going to assume it was cursed. And then suddenly the vision of this is now in front of him. He didn't count on this. He's throwing his arms up like this. He's trying to defend himself as the ghost of Belit with her ghost sword spears him through the heart. And he's throwing his whole weight back, full stop. I'm being stabbed through the heart. But it's a ghost. Can't really do much harm. But it buys Conan the time he needs. He's able to push the actual thing off his leg, jumps up with his sword, and literally cleaves the ape in 2. So hard that its torso falls to one side while its legs fall to another. Cut scene. Conan goes back to the ship. He cuts it free from the actual mooring where Belit's pyre is and rides down the river with the current. Cut scene again. Conan is now standing on the shores and he's watching the Tigris float out with a full sail off in the distance out into the sea as he looks on it as it starts to be embroiled with the flames of the fire that he lit. And as he looks on it, he's sad. He's angry with what happened. But he also says to himself that she was the sea, and now that she's gone, the sea is dead to him. He doesn't want that sea anymore, and as much as he doesn't want to go marching back through the jungles behind him, he's more willing to do that than anything else. End of story. What a fantastic story. I love this tale. It's one of my favorite Robert E. Howards of all time. I cannot get over the work that he put into this, the layers upon layers, and the curses and mysticism upon mysticism. I've always said, this guy is a master of the onion. There's so many layers that you want to peel back in this thing. You just don't know where to stop. I could sit here with Hyborian Age conspiracy theories about this thing all day, but we won't. That's the Robert E. Howard story. I hope you enjoyed the quick synopsis. Let's get into the Marvel adaptation. Okay, let's get into the Marvel adaptation on this one first. So here's the 2 books we're going to cover today. You got Conan the Barbarian number 58 and Conan the Barbarian number 100. Now I'll tell you, what's funny about this is, years ago, I ended up with a bundle of comics coming into the house that were all Conan books. And you'll see, these have fancy little hole punches in them. I've never seen somebody do this with comics before, but I guess the guy who was trying to store these decided it would be best to punch them in holes and then stick them in binders. I don't know what binder would fit this, but, whatever. So I got rid of most of them because I had no interest in keeping books that had holes in them. But I kept these particular ones because I knew at some point in time we would be doing this very video. And I said, I'm going to need reader copies, so it included, there you go, Belit coming in Conan the Barbarian number 58. This is actually my worst copy of Conan the Barbarian number 100, so I have no problem reading through this one today. Not one of the hole punchy ones, but yeah, an aside there. Now, honorable mention that we're not talking about today, but I am going to show you guys before we get into this, is Conan the Barbarian number 57, which is the issue before this one. And what this has in it is it has the background as to what Conan was doing in Argos. And the background about how he ended up in front of that judge that he ended up cleaving their brain into. And basically, actually, it talks a little bit about the corruption in the city as well, which is kind of cool as well. But that honorable mention, because it gives you a little bit of the backstory as to why he was riding that horse like a maniac down towards the pier at the beginning of the story. And honorable mention goes into this one as well, which also same collection, fancy holes. Number 59, which actually does a little bit talking into Belit being a Stygian princess and giving more of the origin about her. Now, not necessarily a reading for the overall Robert E. Howard story or for the actual comic adaptation of what we're calling the Queen of the Black Coast, but still, overall a good one. I enjoy both of these. If you really are interested in getting more of the Marvel mythos out, I think you do need to read both of these. And then you can probably skip right up to number 100 if you just want to get that done. All right, so Conan Barbarian number 58. How does the story start off? Well, guess what? It starts off with Conan riding his horse like a maniac towards the port. Why is he riding towards the port? Well, they describe he's being pursued. And you see him ride down to the port. You see him basically come to an end where he jumps and brings his horse reining up to a stop at the very end. And then jumps from the horse onto the ship, where he then has a conversation with young Tito and tells him to push off. This is actually pretty good. Where he says, I'll pay my way with steel. That is exactly the line that he uses in the Robert E. Howard prose piece, which is kind of cool. You see the city guard yelling at him to turn around, getting the archers. Where are the damned archers? And it doesn't matter, because they ride off. Tito's had enough of Argosian, well, quite frankly, put graft, because they've taken enough money out of his pocket over the years. So he's completely fine with just taking Conan off with him. His comment was kind of funny, though. He says, I recognize the next time I come back to town, I'm going to have to explain myself here and why I rode on. But I'll just say you took me under force of arms and I had no choice. And then he says, well, explain to me why you're here. And Conan walks through the idea of, he was there with a buddy of his and his lady friend when the captain of the King's Guard decided to do something rather unpleasant and was run through by the friend, which is fully run into in details in number 57, in case you're interested in picking that up. Unfortunately, Conan has recognized that as actually being with them previously, and he's dragged off to court, where the judge decides to tell him all about his duty, and he says, I'm not explaining where he is to you, because, well, A, I don't know, but B, he's my friend, and I'm not disgracing my honor to do this. And he escapes and promptly cleaves the guy's head in two, right there, in twain. Now, this ring is actually really, really important if you do pick up this story. Watch for it. It actually means something. The other thing I'll actually say, I forgot to say this as well. Check out the art of this. Mike Plug art. Awesome stuff. Really a fun book to read. Great piece of background on this. Yeah, I'll shot you. Anyways, so Conan is explaining this, I'm going to work with you guys and we got no issues. And I use a fighting man because, I can always fight off the pirates. And this is where they describe the whole thing of them heading south. They go past the people of Shem. They then head past Stygia, and this is the ship that I mentioned earlier where they were somewhat brazenly, actually is the word that he uses in Robert E. Howard's prose piece, of these young ladies of the night trying to bring them in, but they don't stop because they know they'll be killed. They continue to head further south into Koth, not Kush. No, Kush, not Koth. I said it totally wrong, Kush. I wonder how many times I screwed that up. It doesn't matter. Anyways, heading off into Kush, where they then find that this village has been slaughtered. He says it's the work of Belit. And there's the comment right there, pronounced by us anyways, Belit. That's important. And they say, no, the tigress is here. We gotta go. See, tigress, it's Belit. And he goes nuts saying, row, let's get the heck out of here. Well, they row as best they can, but it ain't gonna do anything. And Conan pulls out his bow and arrow and he's randomly shooting. And there's him shooting the person beside Belit. And the battle ensues. And Conan does in fact lead a heck of a jump onto the Tigris and does the slaughter I mentioned earlier, where they were going to step back and do the whole process of throwing the spears on. But what's interesting here is Tito, instead of being skewered by an arrow from behind, I believe he took it in the back of the neck, if I remember correctly. And this one only takes it in the arm. And Conan has to watch his friend Tito get slaughtered by this guy. That, for some reason, was added in there. And you'll see why in a minute. Because here's Belit halting them and then walking up and asking a bunch of questions. And basically says, well, you know, you're no Hyborian. Says, if you're going to stay with me, though, I got to have a test. And here we have a classic theme in Marvel Comics with Conan. Invariably, when Conan has to be tested, it has to be through strength of arms. Now, this is why we saw Tito back here have to get slaughtered by this individual previously. Conan clearly is not pleased with this. Is to create a sense of Conan here actually enacting justice by throwing him overboard through the test of strength to prove why he'd be worthy to stay on the ship. Very interesting that this whole thing happens here. This is completely written in by Marvel. I think it's a fun little addict, and it does a nice little piece of the character development, but not really the stuff you're looking for. Anyway, this is where they have more of the conversation of, you know, you should stick with me and be my king. And Conan looks back, and there's his ship, the flailing into the ocean there, the Argus, and he's, I'll sail with you. Now, this part here, here's a nuance here. Now, let me show you a little image up here at the front. Do you see that? Do you see that right there? Do you see that logo right there? Is it clear in the shot? Is it clear? Here, let me get close for you. See that? See that right there? Approved by the Comics Code Authority. They actually do have a save from time to time. Let's get a crystal hair out of the way there. Bingo. And it's right here. Now, what's interesting about this is this dance, the mating dance of Belit, the love dance of Belit, however you want to call it. The bottom line here is this is where things get a little different. Now, I want you to bear in mind, in Robert E. Howard's prose piece, if you were looking at Belit right here, she would be completely naked from the description that I'm getting, pretty much from mid-waist up. That's Belit. She has no problem just being all out there, all right? But Marvel had to change that a little bit. I get it. You've got to draw it into a Conan comic. You got to do your thing, away you go. The love dance, not the mating dance, the love dance occurs. Now, this is very interesting here. Now, look at Conan's leg positions here. This was redone. This original image, if you read through, where did I read this? It was in a frontispiece to one of the, what was it in? Let's think back on this now. I believe it was one of the Chronicles of Conan where they were discussing this, where this had to be redone. And the reason why this had to be redone is because when she throws herself at Conan, after Conan's feet, after her dance, that she comes up, and Conan's leg originally was drawn with this leg over here, not underneath. And this, I believe, was probably redone as well. Note where the leg position is here, on either side. On here, they had to be on one side. There's a reason for that, because her throwing herself down with his legs on either side may infer something else altogether, which apparently the Comics Code Authority had an issue with. If any of you are interested in more of that, you could probably go onto the Google and figure that out yourself. But I know I read that in front of this piece, and I'm pretty sure it was in one of the Chronicles of Conan collections by Dark Horse, now that I think back on it in more detail. Interesting piece, but it does show you how powerful the Comics Code Authority was back then. And this is effectively where this chapter of the Robert E. Howard story of the Queen of the Black Coast ends. It then jumps back in and picks up in issue number 100 with all those issues in between basically being filler pieces. Kind of a neat way to end it off there, but I guess it's a natural progression where you're going to go from one piece to the next. Now, before they could jump right off to the next, though, obviously Marvel had to do a little bit more work. Marvel decided that they needed, this is the honorable mention piece, they needed to give you a little bit of background as to who this Belit is. And I don't know why they did this, but this issue number 59 really does dive into that, because it talks to the origin of Belit and how she actually came into being this pirate queen. Rather interesting, though, is how this one ends, and I'm just going to include this one here for context. It's not actually part of the overall story, about how Belit, when she actually ends up taking over the ship and leading this group of pilots out, they see her as a goddess. And the reason why is because she has this thing called the Eye of Dagon. Now, that Eye of Dagon is really not all that important to us who are just here looking at the Robert E. Howard content. But this page here is important. When we get to issue number 100, I'm going to reference back to this, and I'm going to reference back to this for a reason. Conan has wandered off after hearing the whole story from the oldest friend of Belit on the ship. And as he's walking past, he sees Belit basically lording over a chest full of gems where she's throwing more gems in. She's just got this weird look in her face as she's so happy to be with all of her money. That means something. Kind of weird. Anyway, we'll reference it back when we get into issue number 100. Okay, issue 100. Let's get into this bad boy. All right, so this is my reader copy. And as we see, it's a square bound. Obviously, Marvel decided they really wanted to put some work into this one. And they made it double size. So I do get it because they really wanted to do the job right. This is the dynamic double-sized issue of Death on the Black Coast, where we see the conclusion of the Queen of the Black Coast. 100 issues ago, yeah, this is all talking about when they picked up Conan and the way they went. Anyways, this is where we start off with them saying, okay, so this is, here we are, the river that you've haunted your dreams. Yes, my lover, so we are. And this oldest friend of Belit is sitting here saying, yeah, and I wish we weren't. Now, it's interesting because they say, yeah, this is that river that I was talking about. You know, it means death. And this is where I led, where we rode past earlier. And they talk about the fact that she says, I made a reference then, and I told you I'd tell you the story later. And the reference here from the editors is see issue 60. Now, you may say to me, Tennessee Facts, I wish we could see issue 60. Well, let me help you out with that. There's issue 60. Issue 60, she does in fact reference exactly that. Marvel's being very consistent with this. They are riding south along the coast of Kush. And the river they're going to hit is the very southern boundary of that coast. And of course, I've jumped way too far now, haven't I? Here it is. And they're going past it, and look, it's the river. The river. And advertisement. And she says, yes, this is the river. It means death. It's very poisonous. We don't go up there. We avoid it. And he says, it sounds like you know more about this than you're actually telling me. She says, yeah, and I'll tell you about it later. For now, let's go further south. So there's your reference in issue number 60. You've now seen that too. Not part of the Robert E. Howard story, but I thought we'd throw that in there, where she describes that she had chased this ship upland, and of course, she waited for 2 days. It came back down with one guy who'd been driven insane, and he died. And she says, let's go up there. And Conan's like, well, let's go up there. Why not? And they head on up there, and they notice how the river is very poisonous and how it's covered by snakes. And this is where they have the conversation about the, I guess what we're going to call Cimmerian philosophy. Note the tear in the pages. This is why this one's my reader copy. And Conan has a whole conversation where she then comes out and decides to, at the end of this, say, well, it's okay, though, because I believe there is an afterlife. And again, if something happens, I will come back. Where are we at here? Where are we at here? Were I still in death and you fighting for life, I would come back from the abyss and aid you. Exact quote from Robert E. Howard. And of course, they're going to do some, schmooshy here. But then the giant snaky python thing comes and grabs the watchman, and they cleave it, and it falls into the river, dying because he cleaved it so hard, but took the guy with him. Conan takes watch. Nothing else happens for the rest of the night. And they just, and oh, by the way, Belit's oldest friend says, we shouldn't be here. And Belit says, well, that's fine. If anybody wants to turn back, you should turn back. And everybody else is like, no, you're our goddess. Of course we're going to listen to you. Well, they wake up in the morning. They find themselves there at the actual city. There's the pyramid. Can you see? There it is. There's the pyramid. And in this case, they've cut or truncated the pyramid to put this pillar on top. And there's your winged ape that they see flying off. They wander on into land, and they find the actual sacrificial temple or sacrificial land where they say, let's move this aside. Oh, Conan, I heard a serpent, come kill it. She goes back, or he goes back, while these guys trigger the trap and all get killed. And she says, you knew of this girl. I merely suspected, so I employed a ruse to lure you, and you let your men be killed. The old ones guarded their treasures well, and I will not chance losing you. Again, this sort of gets to that whole point of, is she actually getting a little bit crazy as she's coming into this city? Because she's really running ahead a lot here. And killing her own men to get loot? Weird. Anyways, Conan just says, well, that's kind of cold, but whatever. Starts digging out the bodies and digs out all the loot. She jumps in, finds the necklace covered in stuff, and then they see, lo and behold, this thing is flying away from the ship. Darn it. Let's go take a look and see if it knocked a hole. No, it knocked out a lot of water. And here she is, when he comes back explaining there's no water and that he's going to go and take some men and find water. And she's got that distant look on her face. Very well, I'll get the loot on board. More alluding to the fact that maybe she's going a little crazy. Like, who jumps in here after you just said the whole thing was probably trapped? Very odd. Anyways, Conan does his back checking. He says, I'm going to check the trail. You guys go ahead. Black Lotus, unconscious, giant dreams. Winged guys, suddenly the shoreline changes because there's a giant earthquake. Now, they don't reference the poles shifting here, but volcanoes, reptilian life ravages, their city is taken apart, many of them die, those who do survive descend into madness, blood feuds, cannibalism, one guy left. There you go. Whew, that was a lot of material to cover in like 3 different panels there, but we got there. And all that's left is the guy. And lo and behold, Stygians come wandering out, 50 of them. This guy does some sort of ensorceling, and they all turn into hyenas, which then turn around and hunt people who come up the river afterwards and kill them. That all pretty much matches what we saw in the dreams. And then Conan in his dreams continues to see himself coming upriver, and he sees his own men being driven crazy and run away when he wakes up. Recognizes the Black Lotus, sees a paw print, which he thinks was a hyena, but then it chose to go back. Could be because that hyena recognized the Black Lotus and was terrified. Calls for his men, looks forward and sees the spears on the ground and goes, oh, this could be bad. This might actually be in line with that whole dream I had. And he turns to see that it is in fact one of his own men. And this is actually an interesting part, because in Marvel, this character was one that Conan got to know even more than what Robert E. Howard wrote into his story, which is why this particular battle was so demoralizing for him, because he had to kill this man who was insane, but who was formerly his friend. And he does see that all of his own men have been run off the cliff, and vultures, and he goes running back at full speed to see that again there is that slaughter, and there's Belit hanging from the yardarm by that very necklace, where after he set up the pyre, threw the jewels in the water, he's now waiting for the attack. And it comes. The hyenas come out, and once again he recognizes, there's only 20 of these hyenas. I guess my men did a good job. Now, this is where I'm going to interject a little bit here. It could be that what Robert E. Howard was alluding to is not only did Conan's men do a good job, but those 50 guys were put together into hyenas quite some time ago. But time passes after the ensorceling, and they do reference the fact that people come up the river and that they're slaughtered by the hyenas. It could be that 30 hyenas were killed over this substantial span of time, which could include the, I guess, what we call the attrition from these guys over years, and the work of Conan's own men. I don't know, just one of those little nitpicky points. Conan does in fact pick them all off with arrows until there's only 3 left, and then he just beats them back as savagely. Actually, there's more than 3 here. It's interesting. That is more than 3. I never caught that until just now. Anyways, he does slaughter these. I guess they didn't want the arrows to do the thing all the way through, because I guess they wanted him to really have a chance. Where's the monster that slew my mate? Again, not part of the Robert E. Howard story, but Marvel writing, really building up that sense of anticipation. And here we go to where the last 3 are, where he's beating them down. I think he grabs one by the throat, throws another one off, one bites him on the arm. He's just basically recovering from this battle when he sees the wing thing over him, goes to grab his sword, and this is where the whole thing starts falling in on him. He jumps, is in fact buried under the marble pillar. I always pictured him lying on his back, but you know, it makes just as much makes sense for that. Winged one lands, he can't reach his sword, it's charging him, and Belit arrives, wearing his crimson cloak. Which is interesting because she'd be very, very naked in the Robert E. Howard description. But, you know, Comics Code Authority won't let that through. Hell, they wouldn't even let him sit properly in the prior book. Anyways, runs the ghost through, or runs the ape through as a ghost. And Conan hears the word again. Were I still in death and you fighting for your life, I would come back from the abyss and aid you. The ape is still recovering and gives Conan enough time to push this stone aside, pick up the sword, and they do describe him cleaving it in two, although they don't really show it here. What's interesting is as he turns around now, he starts to recognize that the hyenas are turning into Stygians, who are then just rapidly turning into dust and disappearing, which probably explains why there weren't any bodies around when he came back to his own ship after the slaughter. He heads back to shore, cuts his ship loose, takes it downriver, and then you have that final cut scene where he's looking and the ship is flying or floating off into the distance, and he's just saying that's the last voyage of the Tigris. And they do actually show him weeping. Kind of interesting. Not really discussed in the Robert E. Howard story, but it's just as plausible as anything else. Anyways, he's returned Belit to the sea because she was the sea. She lent it splendor and allure. Without her, it rolls a barren, dreary, and desolate waste from pole to pole. He really has no interest in going back. And that is the end of The Queen of the Black Coast from Marvel. Not a bad adaptation. Actually, fairly close. A couple little nuances that are fairly different. That trial by, I guess, combat on the Tigris when he was first brought on board. A little bit of weirdness with regards to the whole thing with more of a battle with Magora, who is Nagora in the Robert E. Howard version. A little different when the number of hyenas that actually made it up to the top of the pyramid. That actually took him out. That was a little different. But otherwise, it was very, very faithful to the Robert E. Howard version. Not bad. All right, let's get into the Ablaze version of this one. So we are going through the hardcover version of this because, well, as you guys know, when Ablaze put out the Sumerian, they put out a bajillion different variant copies. And I was like, well, what copy do I get? And I was like, you know what? I've got all the hardcovers over there. Just grab one of them. Let's go. So we're going through this. No worries about which version or which cover we're going to go with here. This one is collected with red nails, which, by the way, was super awesome, fantastico. Really enjoyed that. Now, I'm going to start this off right now by saying this was a very unique style of art that they chose to do with this. Now, I know when a lot of people read their Conan, they have an idea in their head. It's got to be this gritty sort of John Buscema-esque type thing with Ernie Chan type stuff. And this is what we expect to see, or it's got to be over-the-top realistic because we got to see all the detail. This doesn't have it. It's very cartoonish, which is fun. And it actually does a very neat spin on the story. But again, we're not here to get into that. We're here to talk about what's closer to the Robert E. Howard story. And this actually starts a little bit before Robert E. Howard's story starts off, where it talks about the port city and Conan being in court. And it talks about him actually slaughtering the judge. I believe that's the face of the judge right there, by the way. Slaughtering the judge. And then getting out and stealing the governor's horse. And this panel, I believe, right here is probably where we see the Robert E. Howard story starting. And this is probably where you actually see the Marvel story starting as well. Because we don't have any of this. We just have Conan heading off with a horse. Here you have Conan now stealing this horse, jumping this ridiculous distance down to get that horse. I don't know how he made that. But gets over here, gets the horse while he's being shot at by archers, and is basically jumping down roofs through the city. Very much similar to that whole chase scene, that epic chase scene in the Tintin animated movie, which was really, really cool, by the way. You guys should watch that. Unfortunately, his horse takes an arrow in the neck, and in the last couple leaps, it does end up making it into the water. Not the pier, the water. Conan gets free of the horse and swims up and actually does climb onto this ship where he finds out that they're headed for Kush. And he says, great, that's where I'm going to. And a very similar conversation here between Conan and Tito are exactly what occurred. Why are you coming with me? What are you going to pay for? How did you end up being chased by the city guard? I don't really care about them. Let's go. I could always use a guy to protect me. But then you have this weird montage panel over here. I guess the inference here is that they're actually showing that Conan actually was of use to Tito while they were heading south down into Kush. Because I am assuming here that these are raiders or pirates that he has had to fight for, or fight with, on behalf of the Argus on their way south. Next, neat little thing. They end up making it to Kush, where they see the first village that had been completely slaughtered. And Tito's a little upset. Well, I used to trade with these people. This has got to be the work of pirates. And, of course, the tigress is seen immediately. And Tito loses his mind. It's the tigress. We got to get back to shore. And Conan's like, well, I'm going to thin some of these guys out, but you guys should probably fight instead of, trying to get back to shore. But it doesn't make any difference. And then you have this really cool depiction of the actual crew of Belit occur. And this is how they're drawn all the way through. I love the way that they've included face paint with this to try to be more of a psychologically horrifying horde of pirates that would then go on to attack anything that's going nearby. Great piece of psychological warfare. Really, really cool addition. And it basically turns into a slaughter. Tito is taken out not by an arrow but by a spear. I'll take it. And the battle occurs, and in this, you don't really get a sense of, really, is Conan fighting on the Argus or on the Tigris? But I think he's still fighting on the Argus in this one, that he doesn't jump over the Tigris, because you see fire being brought into this, and you know they burned the Argus in the story, whereas they wouldn't burn the Tigris. So I'm kind of thinking that's probably where he stayed on, until he's eventually tackled by Belit. And really, they have a conversation. Because she's like, well, hold on. You're not just some Hycurian. You're not some sort of fat Argosian. Like, what are you all about? And she's like, well, I'm from Argus. No, you're not. Okay, well, I'm from Conan, from Sumerian. It's like, well, I've never heard of you guys before, but you guys are freaking horrifying. And you're really awesome. I'm smitten. How about you become my king? Pretty much what you saw in the Robert E. Howard story. Maybe just a little more cutthroat, but whatever, it works, right? Conan looks back, sees the Argus burning and falling into the ocean. Yeah, I'll sail with you. And she says, you won't regret it. And then you have the cutscene to him being tended to by basically the witch doctor that's on the ship, while she then performs her mating dance and throws herself down on him and crush me with your burning love, which I believe is where you're getting into the whole idea later of where she makes the comment of him crushing her soul into his, which again plays into why she would always come back from death to help him. Anyway, kind of neat. They continue to head on south,
all sorts of slaughters happen. People all get to know about Amra, and they get to know about Belit, and they're like, oh yeah, well, we're going to go to this river because here's the river at the southern end of Kush, which we talked about. You know, I once harbored here at the mouth, and I waited for this other ship to come, and you know, this river is called Death, and its waters are too poisonous, but I heard tell that there's a city up there, so I waited for you, and now we're going to go. So they head on up there, and we'll go and let us go and sack that city. And Conan does actually show himself to be somewhat more active in this, which is kind of cool, because he's actually down rowing with the men. And she's like, you're stupid. And he's like, no, I'm the heart of this crew, and they fight with me. They need to see me working with them as well. Now, this is the night scene, where they start to discuss Sumerian philosophy, which I think is kind of funny. But we're going to cut past a couple pages here, because you see, the discussion of Sumerian philosophy in Ablaze's mind apparently is too boring. So what they need to do is they need to mix that in with a giant sexy montage, where we're going to jump past that because I want to. But during the giant sexy montage, what you need to be aware of is snake. The snake now attacks while they're in the middle of a giant sexy montage. And Conan says like, no. Nothing born is invincible, and goes out to kill the snake, and the snake dies. And long live Conan. And she's like, yeah, I wasn't wrong. I was right to bring this guy along. Totally the right choice. I love the facial expression on Belit. They really do play her well in this story. You really do show her character so much more. Anyways, the next day they end up making their way in, and lo and behold, there's the city. The city in this is much more underwater. They're actually able to cruise through a lot of it until they get to the wharf, where when they get there, they see, instead of the pyramid with the thing sticking out on top, you end up with, there we are, giant monkey, or giant winged ape is right there. And this giant winged ape is drawn really cool. It's much more demonic than we saw previously. It doesn't really match the idea of a winged ape, but I guess with creative license, we'll give it to them. They head into the city, and of course we're going to go and we're going to climb up to this because, you know, I'm pretty sure that there's some loot up here, and there's no stairs. That's kind of weird. He's like, well, I'll lead the way, and everybody follows him up, and they climb up into, again, what I'm assuming by this image here would be the pyramid, where they find all sorts of really weird stuff. And she calls Conan back and says, let's let them open this up, and you guys go ahead and do this. And of course, it is a trap, and it collapses, and it kills the men. And Conan's like, I feared something like this. The ancients knew how to keep the treasure. Now, this was Conan saying this, not Belit in this one. Very interesting. Anyways, they dig them out, and they find the crypt is completely full of gold. This is much more gold than what Robert E. Howard had. And she goes nuts. Jumps right into it. Now, that's you know, when the place is trapped, probably not the best things to do. And Conan's like, Belit, come back, and then the Tigress is under attack, and he goes tearing down to find that because in this case, they did actually leave the crew on the Tigress. They didn't leave it unguarded. And they've all been slaughtered. They've been slaughtered, and there's no water, and he's like, I can't drink this river water, so I'm going to go get stuff. She's like, yeah, very well. I'll get the loot on board, which is exactly the language used in Robert E. Howard's story, as well as the Marvel edition. He's like, I'm going to be back shortly, but you can see she's being very, I don't know, just pushing it off, just less of a sense of her being ensorcelled that we saw in Marvel, but definitely a sense of her being a little tippy bit crazy here. Anyways, I still love the facial expressions. This was so well done. He goes slashing his way on through to find that he's being attacked by the giant ape, and as he's fighting the giant ape, falls backwards into the Black Lotus, where he's challenging it, saying, come and get me, but it's too terrified. It backs off, but look at the really cool drawing on it. Much more demonic-like than Great Ape, because I'm pretty sure apes don't have horns or antlers. Yeah, anyway, at least he knows he can actually hurt the darn thing. His own men are just slaughtered. He does have the dream, though, where he sees the history of these people and how they devolved down to this one person that's left. And he wakes up, and again, all my men are gone. And he's like, I better go back, and no. And Bailey, look at the outline here. This is not just hung. And she hasn't been hung by the blood necklace thing that was this piece of such crucial mythos that was thrown into the original story. She's been hung by these ropes. But I believe what Ablaze was showing here is that she's dead. Like, this isn't just, okay, you were just hung and the body is fine. Look at this. Like, a leg is missing. A piece of this leg is gone. This demonic ape thing literally killed the living hell out of everybody. You can see it's ripped people asunder here. And Belit was not saved from that particular process. Anyways, cut scene, Conan's waiting. He's like, I'm waiting. and the ape attacks. Winged ape attacks, and there's a heck of a battle. He falls off, and I believe this is where you have... Yes. He's knocked into a pillar of some sort, which then falls on him during the battle and gets stuck. Now, he's already stuck a spear in this thing. I believe that happened back over here. So this thing is already fairly hurt, and it's about to come back and get him because he's pinned, and lo and behold, Belit appears. I told you, my love. And then distracts long enough. Now, you don't have the stabbing here, but you have the distraction long enough for him to pick up his sword, get himself free, and you have the battle. The epic battle where he says, open your mouth, stabs a spear down through its mouth, all the way down to the ground, and then cuts it in half. And then the whole story ends with him basically setting off the pyre and being sad, and that's it. Afterwards, I will carry on. And then, of course, you get the prose piece. If you really want to, and you don't have a copy of a book like this one, you can go ahead and just read the prose piece here, because it's collected, and it is actually in each issue of this miniseries when it came out. Very cool. Anyways, there you go. There is your Ablaze version. Quite different. In some ways, it really added to the story. Oh, let's get back to the conclusion and see which one of these is closer to the Robert E. Howard version. I think we probably know this one already.
Baby, please don't go. You will leave. I love you so. Say, please don't go. Do, 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 do. All right, let's get into this one and let's talk about which one of these is actually closer to the Robert E. Howard original intent. Let's go with that wording here, shall we? All right, we compared the Ablaze version and the Marvel version here. We did Marvel first, and then we jumped into what Ablaze did many, many, many years later, because the Ablaze version is fairly recent. Now, what's interesting here is the Ablaze version has always been advertised as, this is the version that's close to what Robert E. Howard wanted. This is the grittier version, the sexier version, the uncensored version. There are times where it's actually somewhat choppy to read when you read through these because they're translated. They were not originally published in English. So as a result of that, some of the language flow in this does follow strangely. If you have some familiarity with French, I'll tell you, it helps. That's all I'm going to say there. Let's talk about the two versions independently, though. All right, so what did Marvel do here? Well, Marvel did a fairly good job. It was interesting that they started off an issue before where they were jumping into this to build up and create a sense of, well, why? Why was Conan riding on a horse towards the pier? What was the actual rationale there? What was he thinking? Why was he going in that direction? And that's where you had that sort of precursor story that I mentioned. I give it an honorable mention, but let's not consider it as part of the overall story. The overall story here is going to be just issue 58 and issue 100. Issue 58 was fairly close. I really enjoyed what they did there, and I think the only thing that they really threw off, and where they went a little off to the side, was when they decided to have Tito, instead of getting killed by an arrow, got shot in the arm and then killed by a member of Belit's crew. And then Conan had that trial by combat before Belit was even willing to make the offer of, I want you to be my king. Robert E. Howard really, truly intended for her to be smitten at first glance. Based on what he can do and just, I guess, really what the obscurity of who he was to her. Because being a Stygian, or somebody from the far south at a bare minimum, she'd have no knowledge of what a Cimmerian is, or who they are, or why they are, or what they do. Like, that would all be very unique to her, and somewhat exotic. So maybe that's why. But other than that, that story was very, very close. Obviously, there was that whole issue with the Comics Code Authority, and there was a little sniff at the end there where something had to change. But at the end of the day, the story overall was quite good. Very close to what Robert E. Howard had intended. Then you go on to issue number 100. Now, you got to skip all that stuff in between. Obviously, there's a lot more content, and really does fill out that small vignette suggestion in the Robert E. Howard story of time passing and them continuing to raid, and how the drums of the locals were played to carry on the message that, she had found a mate. That's really what Marvel was doing with those issues in between. But then you get to issue 100, and issue 100 starts off with them being right there. She's had a dream of this river, and she explains the past that she's had with this river, and we're going to go up this river. We're going to do everything we need to do. The hyenas were included in that, which was also very, very well done. Very cool, nicely done. The winged ape, very close, exactly the story that you would have expected. And her reaching in and pulling out that necklace full of the bloodstones, and then hanging by those very bloodstones from the yardarm. All bang on. The only real difference there was a little bit more combat between Conan and Magora, not Nagora. because they had to really draw that out to show how sad that was. Also, the difference there being that it really wasn't, well, it was Belit being somewhat more enamored with the fact that there's wealth here and almost being ensorcelled. And that really wasn't too much, it was hinted at in Robert E. Howard's, but it wasn't as obvious. A very thorough and very true version of the Robert E. Howard story, in my opinion. I think it was really, really well done. All right, let's talk about the Ablaze version. I really like what they did there. Personally, I thought that was really cool. Now, here's the problems, though. It was all over the map. There were times, like it started off before the Robert E. Howard story even starts, which is fine. Marvel did the same thing. They gave it its own issue. But again, we're going to set that aside. We're not going to hold that against them because I'm going to give Marvel a mulligan on it, so why wouldn't I give Ablaze a mulligan on that? So we'll let that one go. He ended up in the water. He swam up. He didn't jump off of a horse. The battle, he didn't jump onto the Tigris. He was fighting from the Argus. The snake thing that came up was slaughtering so many members of the crew on the ship when it first attacked. There's no hyenas. What else? They left a skeleton crew to actually guard the ship. The pyramid with the pillar on top of it wasn't there. The crypt that was supposed to be at the bottom of a tower that when you turn it sideways it's going to fall, it wasn't there. It was instead this sort of vault sitting inside a building that they were climbing. What else have we got there? The fact that she dove into a giant crypt that was people deep that she could jump into that was full of wealth, as opposed to it just being a small nook, which was sort of what was inferred in the Robert E. Howard story. There's a lot in there. The battle at the end, where it's him versus the gorilla ape thing. The fact that this is more of a demon than a gorilla. There's a lot here that's just off base. The overall theme is very close to the Robert E. Howard story, but it just isn't there. It's just off. So, I mean, as I said, when we were going through this one and we finished off that vignette where I was looking at the Sumerian version to begin with, I said, I think we probably already know which one of these is closer. And I got to give it hands down to Marvel. Of the two, I'm not here to judge and say which one's the better story. I think they're both really, really good. But if the question is which one's closer to Robert E. Howard, I got to give it to Marvel. So, the next video is going to be the winner of this battle, the Marvel version, taking on the Dark Horse version. Now, that's going to be an interesting one, because Dark Horse, they've been doing some really good stuff. All right, let's wrap this one up and get out of here. All right, let's wrap this bad boy up. Well, I tell you guys, this was a fun one. I actually was terrified of jumping into this video for a variety of reasons, as I mentioned in the intro. The issue is you like the story so much that you're terrified you're going to get into it and you're just going to ruin it for yourself. But I'm so happy that did not happen. Of the two, Marvel clearly was the one that was closer to the Robert E. Howard original story. Which is funny because Ablaze initially was always advertising these were the stories as Robert E. Howard intended them to be told. But the Ablaze version was really, really cool. The art style and the story and the adaptations to it just made it a totally different tale. And it was really, really good. I encourage any of you, if you are interested and you want to read something that's close, go ahead and read that one. It's just a fun story. Everybody, that's our video for this week. The next one we're going to have to do in this series is going to be the battle where we take on the Marvel version versus the Dark Horse version of this very story. Now, in that one, what we're going to do is we're just going to refer back to this one a lot, and you guys can watch the segments and chapters in here if you need to refresh your mind. Otherwise, we'll just be jumping pretty quickly into that Dark Horse version. Anyways, that's our video for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you in the next one.